Before the snow swallowed the plains, fate was already riding toward one broken man. A widowed cowboy, a deadly winter night, and two lives frozen between death and destiny. What happened next challenged the rules of the frontier and changed all their futures forever. If you love powerful frontier stories filled with survival, sacrifice, and unexpected love, make sure you subscribe to Love in the Old West Story, share this video with a fellow story lover, and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Now settle in, let's get started. The wind howled across the high plains like a living thing, sharp enough to cut through bone and memory alike. Eli Mercer pulled his coat tighter as his horse slowed, hooves crunching through snow that had no business being this deep so early in the season. He had learned long ago not to question the land, only to endure it. 3 winters had passed since he buried his wife on a hill overlooking the Cottonwood Creek, and every winter since felt colder than the last. The ranch house waited somewhere beyond the white haze, empty and quiet, but something made him rein in his horse. A sound, faint but wrong, carried on the wind, not an animal, not the land. A human cry, weak and breaking. Eli dismounted, boots sinking deep as he followed the sound toward a cluster of half-buried rocks. His breath fogged thick in front of him, heart pounding harder with every step. When he saw them, time seemed to stall. 2 young women lay huddled together in the snow, their dark hair crusted with ice, thin blankets wrapped uselessly around their shoulders. Apache, he realized instantly, their features unmistakable even beneath the frost. One of them lifted her head slightly, eyes burning with defiance even as her body shook uncontrollably. The other barely moved at all. "Easy," Eli said, his voice rough from disuse and cold. "I ain't here to harm you." The conscious one didn't answer, but her hand tightened protectively around her sister's arm. Eli shrugged off his coat without another thought and draped it over both of them, kneeling despite the cold biting through his trousers. He pressed his fingers to the quieter sister's neck, relief flooding him when he felt a pulse, faint but steady. They were alive, but not for long if they stayed here. He lifted the weaker one first, surprised by how light she was, all bone and fragile warmth. The other tried to stand on her own and nearly collapsed. Eli caught her, their eyes locking for a brief charged moment. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Pride, resolve. He had seen it before long ago when the frontier was raw and people survived because they refused not to. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. Eli wrapped them both in spare blankets and urged his horse forward, ignoring the ache in his own limbs. When he finally reached the house, he carried them inside, the familiar emptiness shattered by the urgency of life returning to his walls. He stoked the fire until flames roared, set water to boil, and worked with quiet efficiency born of years spent alone. He thawed their hands carefully, rubbed warmth into their feet, and forced small sips of hot broth between trembling lips. Hours passed before the stronger sister finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "My name is Ayana, she is Nita, we are twins." Eli nodded. "I'm Eli, you're safe here." Ayana studied him with sharp eyes. "Men say many things." "That's true," he replied evenly, "but I don't." Nita stirred then, eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to fear until Ayana leaned close and spoke softly in Apache. Whatever she said calmed her, and soon exhaustion claimed her again. Eli stepped back, giving them space, though his gaze lingered. He told himself it was concern, nothing more. Over the next days, the storm trapped them together. Snow piled high against the windows, and the world beyond the ranch might as well not have existed. Eli learned they had been separated from their people after a trading party was attacked. They had walked for days, hiding, surviving on melted snow and roots, until their strength gave out. If he had come an hour later, they would have frozen where they lay. As their strength returned, so did their presence. The house no longer felt hollow. Gianna helped without being asked, learning the rhythm of the ranch with quiet confidence. Nita was gentler, more reserved, her smile small but warm, her laughter rare and precious. Eli found himself listening for their voices, for the sound of life moving through rooms that had echoed with silence for too long. At night, when the fire burned low, Eli sat alone with his thoughts and felt guilt twist in his chest. He had loved his wife deeply, had sworn he would never look at another woman the same way. Yet something was changing, whether he wanted it or not. These women had not come seeking him, and he had not gone looking for them. Fate, cruel and strange, had other ideas. One evening, as snow continued to fall, Ayana sat across from him, her gaze steady and unreadable. "Among my people," she said, "a life debt is not small." Eli frowned. "You don't owe me anything." She shook her head. "You saved us. That binds lives together." Before he could respond, Nita entered the room, her eyes moving between them. There was something unspoken in her expression, something that made Eli shift uncomfortably. He stood abruptly, muttering about checking the horses, and stepped out into the cold night, breathing deeply until the tension eased. He did not yet understand what was forming inside those walls, only that it was powerful and dangerous. 2 lives he had pulled from the edge of death were now intertwined with his own, and the loneliness he had carried for years was beginning to crack. He told himself it was temporary, that once the snow melted, they would go their separate ways. But even as he thought it, he knew the land and the heart rarely followed the plans of men. As the fire burned behind him and the storm raged on, Eli Mercer stood beneath the frozen sky, unaware that his quiet rescue had set into motion a bond that would challenge everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the meaning of family. The storm finally broke on the 9th morning, leaving behind a world so still it felt unreal. Eli stepped outside at dawn and stared across the plains, the snow sparkling under pale sun. For the first time since finding the twins, he felt the weight of what came next. The land would open again, paths would reappear, choices could no longer be delayed by weather or survival. Inside the house, life had settled into a fragile rhythm. Gianna rose early with him, helping tend the animals, her movements sure and practiced, as if she had always belonged to the land. Nita stayed closer to the house, learning Eli's routines, cooking quietly, humming songs that carried a sadness and warmth that stirred something deep in his chest. They spoke more English now, learned quickly, and listened even more than they spoke. One evening, Eli returned from checking the far fence to find them sitting close together by the fire, speaking softly in Apache. When they noticed him, the conversation stopped. Gianna looked at him for a long moment, then stood. "We must speak," she said. Eli nodded, heart tightening. He had known this moment was coming. Gianna's voice was calm but firm. "We cannot stay here without truth. Our people believe in walking forward, not hiding behind silence." Nita stepped closer, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "We know you carry sorrow," she said gently. "We honor that." Eli swallowed. "I don't want to hurt either of you or dishonor my wife." Gianna met his gaze without flinching. "Love does not erase what came before, it builds beside it." The words hit him harder than he expected. He turned away, staring into the fire as memories of Sarah washed over him, her laughter, her strength, the promise they had made to face life together. Losing her had nearly broken him, and surviving had meant closing himself off piece by piece. "I don't know how to be the man you think I am," he said quietly. Nita reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve, light as a breath. "We do not ask you to be anyone else." That night, Eli barely slept. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind, realizing the truth he had been avoiding. The fear wasn't of loving again, it was of losing again, but the land had taught him one thing above all else: nothing survived without risk. The next weeks tested that resolve. Word traveled fast on the frontier. Riders began passing the ranch more often, some slowing to stare too long. One afternoon, a group of armed men appeared again, harder and angrier than before. This time, Eli did not stand alone. Iana stood at his side, rifle steady, Nita just behind, unafraid. "They're under my protection," Eli said flatly. "You don't like it, ride on." There was a long, dangerous pause, then the men turned away. After that, the ranch was left alone. Spring came slowly, melting snow into rivers of mud and life. With it came clarity. The twins spoke openly of their customs, of shared bonds and shared lives. Eli listened, not as a man clinging to old rules, but as one learning new truths. There was no rivalry between the sisters, no jealousy. What they shared was deeper than ownership. It was unity. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains gold, Eli stood with them on the rise overlooking the land. He thought of the grave on the hill, of the promise he had once made. He whispered Sarah's name into the wind, asking forgiveness or perhaps blessing. When he turned back, Ayana and Nita waited silently. "I can't promise an easy life," Eli said. "Folks will judge. Hard times will come." Ayana smiled faintly. "Hard times are not strangers to us." Nita nodded. "We choose this life with you." Eli felt something inside him finally settle, not the erasure of grief, but its transformation. He reached out, taking both their hands, grounding himself in their warmth. Years passed. The ranch grew, crops flourished. Laughter returned to the house in a way Eli had never expected to hear again. They built a life defined not by the world's approval, but by respect, work, and shared devotion. When children came, they were raised with stories from both worlds, taught strength, kindness, and belonging. Travelers who passed through spoke in hushed tones of the widowed cowboy and the twin Apache women who defied the frontier's rules. Some whispered judgment, others spoke with awe, but all agreed on one thing: that ranch was a place of rare peace. And on quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the wind moved gently across the plains, Eli would sit between Ayana and Nita, knowing that love had found him not despite his brokenness, but because of it. In the end, the snowstorm that nearly took 2 lives had given birth to one unbreakable family, and the land, vast and unforgiving, had made room for a truth only the brave dared to live. Time moved on quietly, but the memory of that frozen night never faded. Years later, with his hair turned white and his steps slower, Eli Mercer still looked toward the rise where the past rested and the present breathed. The ranch was no longer just land. It was a home shaped by loss and healed by purpose, a place where pain had once ruled, but hope had taken root. Gianna and Nita remained at his side, steady and unbroken. Life tested them, as it always does on the frontier, yet their bond never weakened. The children grew strong, learning the language of the land and the truth that love is not confined to one shape. They knew their family was different, but never fragile. The outside world judged when it wished, but within those walls, only honesty and devotion mattered. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Eli took both their hands and spoke softly of peace and gratitude. The emptiness he once carried was gone, replaced by a quiet fullness he had never thought possible. What the snowstorm had nearly taken, it returned 100-fold. And so, on the wide plains, where winter once delivered death, love claimed the land forever, leaving behind a legacy stronger than the cold that started it all.